Welcome back again to another episode of the Candid Sales Rep Podcast. I'm Ken Lundin, your host, and I am absolutely thrilled to death. Today, we get to explore the idea of sales on two different perspectives. So one, we have Ben Booth with us, and he has an expertise in helping sales leaders get the most out of their teams, especially in high-pressure environments, which I think we could say sales is. But secondarily, not only is he helping sales leaders do that through his company, but he's also a sales guy. So you get to live it from both ends today. So I'm super excited to dive into this conversation with you, Ben, about how can you actually delve into effectively balancing personal sales quotas with the leadership of growing a team and the importance of hiring the right talent. So Ben, absolutely thrilled you're here, brother. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ken. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Yeah, this will be fun because, as everybody should know by now, if you've watched a few episodes, I'm kind of a smart ass, and I love it when I get to interview people who have spent time across the pond because they give it right back to me. So, but I do want to start, when we were talking earlier in the pre-show, we started talking about the idea that, there are very few people who say, hey, I want to be in sales, and they do that at university, right? And that's America, and we have some programs like that, but you were saying, start talking about in the United Kingdom and overseas, it's even worse. So, I guess that begs the question, how in the world do you end up getting into the world of sales?
Yeah, it's so much worse in the UK, Ken. Sales is still a pretty dirty word to graduates and early career people. I actually wanted to be a professional sports player when I was growing up, like pretty much everyone else. Quickly realized I wasn't quite good enough for that. So I went and did a law degree, and I was applying to tons of graduate roles as I was finishing university, and came across Pareto Law, which I'm pretty sure I thought was a law firm at the start. I got a call from one of the internal recruiters who, asked me what I was motivated by, asked me what I was interested in. Those things were progression, money, a good culture. And she actually opened up the idea of me considering a career in sales, which at the start I was totally against, but I said, you know what, I've not got loads of other interviews going on right now. So I went through to the interview, and I fell in love with the culture, the competition, the stress. And it was probably the best phone call I ever took because I'm still with the same company, albeit in a different continent 6 years later. So like many, Ken, I fell into sales.
I love hearing that story because we don't get many people who said they went and got a law degree and then ended up in sales. So what's like the biggest kind of two things that were different? So you came from law school, you said, yes, I'll go to a sales job. You get into a sales job, and now you're 6 years in. What are the misconceptions you had on starting in sales versus being where you are today?
Yeah, I think that your view of sales when you're not involved in a B2B sales environment is your people going door to door, trying to flog double glazed windows to old age pensioners. You're bugging people about things that they don't want. I actually had first-hand experience of that when I moved to the US by accidentally putting my number into a health insurance online site, which gave me 200 calls in 24 hours.
Yeah, I think I've got a bunch of those texts from something I did like that like 4 years ago. Then they're still coming through today.
You'd never get rid of them. You never get rid of them, especially over here compared to the UK. But I think that the notion and the misconception is that you are sleazy, pushy, convincing salespeople, rather than, in practice, especially in B2B and commercial sales, you are helping solve problems. And I think that is quite a big mindset shift that a lot of early and junior salespeople go through when they're cold calling or they're cold emailing, is that you're not calling these people to convince them that you're right. You're calling them or reaching out to them because you've got something that can help solve a problem that they've got. And so I think that problem solving, curious element to the role is something that not many people consider to begin with. And then I also think that, the second part of that is the skill development that you get in a sales position, right? Outside of sales, pretty much everything is a sale, whether that is negotiating on a property, whether that is a job interview, whether that's meeting someone on a Saturday night in a bar. Everything is a sale, and actually you can build so many good transferable skills from being in that, boxing ring of a sales role. And so I think those two things are the things that people don't really consider or aren't educated well enough on about sales.
In sales, the best communicators win the best deals.
Yeah, the best listeners or the best active listeners, I think, win the most deals.
And we can talk about what the difference in that is. So tell me this. So you got into it. You're like, oh, it's competitive. As a rugby player, you were like, yeah, I get to smash some stuff and make some bucks, and that was great. What are some things that you found to be the most challenging? You know, that's the biggest misconception or change in mindset that you had to have. But everybody struggles throughout their duration of sales, because I can tell you personally, you know, one day, like on Monday, I feel like I'm going to make 6 million this year. And then on Thursday, I was pretty sure I was going to get fired. So like there's this roller coaster. How about you?
Yeah, exactly the same. You know, I'm definitely going way too gray for 27 years old, and that's definitely down to sales and the roller coaster of emotions. I think that, you know, the first challenge that I faced was actually on your point to communication, and it was connecting and building trust with people who weren't very similar to me. Like you referenced, I'm really sporty, I'm competitive, I'm a little bit brash sometimes, I like going out for a drink, and I found it really easy to connect with similar people like that. However, you know, diversity is such an important topic and foundation of sales at the moment. And I had to build relationships with people who weren't like that and weren't interested in sport and had different backgrounds to me. And as a college graduate, I found that quite difficult to begin with. And so I think one of the things I worked on really hard was being able to recognize my personality profile, but also recognize other people's personality profiles and kind of dial mine to match theirs a little bit more to build better trust with people. So that was probably the number one thing that I tried to develop early on.
Yeah. Tell me how that felt though, right? You'd take these phone calls, and there's some people who you'd be like, oh my gosh, we could be fast mates. And then there's other people who you'd be like, I have no idea why they don't like me. Like, like talk to me about how that kind of that beginning process, how that felt in the beginning versus where you are today.
Yeah, I vividly remember one of my early cold calls in the peak of COVID. I was sat on my bed with my laptop on my knee. My manager was on a Zoom call. I had one phone recording the call and trying to listen in so that she could hear. And I had a pretty sleazy cold call opener. It was, you know, you're going to hate me. This is a cold call. Do you want to hang up or roll the dice? And the other person on the other end of the phone was a HR leader who just replied back saying, why on earth are you calling me before 9 o'clock in the morning? Hung up the phone. And I just could not understand why my number one line of my personality didn't work on her. And, you know, I think that part of progressing in sales is realizing that there's no silver bullet, right? There's no one email structure. There's no one cold call script that books you a meeting every time. And actually, the main thing to focus on really is to how you connect with another individual. The most important part of a cold call is the first 10 seconds, right? And how you open and ultimately get that person to speak to you. And that changes with every single person you speak with. So you have to be, you know, a chameleon to be able to adapt to each different person that you speak with. But I find it shocking that everyone didn't just warm to me straight away, Ken.
Well, certainly you're a nice guy. Like, why wouldn't they, right?
You'd hope so. You'd hope so.
Talk to me about that journey though. So hey, I've got these great openers, and by the way, I'm an extrovert and I'm an athlete and I'm competitive, and by the way, I'm just going to crush this thing. And then there's that moment of realization where you're like, everybody's not quite seeing me that way. So how did you commit to learning to get better? Because that's something I don't think we talk about a lot, is how do you make that choice and flip the switch to actually say, you know what? I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Ken, as well, because I think if a lot of companies looked internally at their onboarding of new sales hires, they would see that it's probably 80% hard skill, technology, understand our business, and 20% actually on soft sales skills and understanding their prospects. I was really fortunate when I joined Pareto that a lot of our training was on actually understanding the environment of your prospect or the person you're speaking to. And so the more that you can focus on, if you are selling to a chief revenue officer, what they care about, how they're targeted, what keeps them up at night, and you can understand their world and then learn how your solution or solutions can support them with that, you're going to be much more successful than doing that vice versa, right? Because if I call a sales leader right now and start pitching them on how amazing Pareto is, I'm probably going to get hang-ups no matter how engaging, dynamic, and confident I sound. Whereas, if I call them and illuminate a problem that they could be facing right now and engage with them on that topic, they're much more likely to have a conversation with me. And that's not to say that Pareto is going to be right to solve that solution, but if you can have conversations with people about things in their world, you're going to have more productive conversations. And if you have more productive conversations, you'll book more meetings, you'll close more deals, and you'll be more successful. So I think my main advice there to people is to meet clients where they're at and talk about them rather than talking about you. Because everyone loves talking about themselves, Ken. That's a staple of anyone, not just salespeople.
Yeah, we're counting on that for this podcast.
Well, that's why I'm here, Ken, 100%.
Start curious, stay curious is a great perspective. And I would think about it too. Like, you're not going to walk in and just bowl somebody over with your words. If you're smart, you're going to listen, whether you're dating or you're coaching or whatever it is you're doing. So I'm sure that athlete background has probably helped you to adjust, I would guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think that athletes typically do go on to do really well in sales. That's a massive overgeneralization. And it's not to say that if you're not an athlete, you're not going to be successful in sales. But I think certainly team sports, going through the, emotional roller coasters of being behind in games or, going into a game that you've expected to lose, but you go on and win, all really help build a good sales profile. I think that curiosity is arguably one of the most important traits of a good salesperson. And, those that seek to or question to understand rather than question to answer are typically most successful. And it's a really hard skill to learn, right? Active listening and not only thinking about what you're going to say next, but also tailoring what you're going to say next based on what that person says. And that's something that both athletes and other people will exercise outside of sales as well.
Yeah, I wonder. So let's talk about this. I want to get into the idea of what some of the sales leadership challenges are out there and how we can do a better job hiring for sales. But I think I would be doing us a disservice if I didn't ask about the impact AI may have today and going forward in this kind of holistic environment. I mean, there are the naysayers out there who are saying that AI is going to put sellers out of business, right? And that all of a sudden we're not going to need Ben, and we're not going to need teams, and we're just going to be able to do all of this stuff via AI. How do you and Pareto look at the implementation of AI today and where it may be going?
Yeah. Pareto is a sales development training and recruiting company. So I'm maybe slightly biased in saying that I do not believe that AI is going to replace salespeople. However, I can strongly say that if you are not using AI in your sales position, you're going to get left behind because it's going to make salespeople so much more competent and efficient. I think a couple of sides here and a couple of use cases. So, like many others, we're trialing and testing things like ChatGPT and using that to do role plays for our new starters. We're using it to map potential prospects and customers based on our existing account base. We're using it to record our meetings and send follow-ups to our clients in what would usually take half an hour now takes 5 minutes. And I think that is one really key skill development that every salesperson or sales manager that listens to this podcast can go away and action is familiarize yourself and train yourself on how to use things like ChatGPT effectively, because it will save you time. And ultimately, time is the same commodity for every salesperson. Everyone's got the same amount of time. And so if you use it more efficiently, you will be more successful. I think on the side of, replacing sales, customers or prospects now have so much more information ahead of joining a sales call that our role has probably changed slightly. However, 99% of meetings that I join with sales leaders, HR leaders, people who own their own business crave some kind of human connection during a sales process. And, it's not the only reason that salespeople buy, but having a relationship and having trust with a salesperson and prospect alike definitely leads to a good sales relationship and process. So I think that using ChatGPT and using Hive and using artificial intelligence will make salespeople more efficient, I don't think it will replace salespeople. What do you think, Ken?
Yeah, I generally agree. I would say this though. Our research says 50% of sellers don't have the basic skill sets to be successful in the skill or industry that they're in. And I would say where AI probably provides the most risk if you're in sales is if you are not actually somebody who's providing value and getting better. So I think the difference is you used to be able to hide and get a new job every 18 months and move on from company to company. And you could just kind of have seller in your, resume and they'd hire you. LinkedIn is littered with people who have been to 7 companies in 10 years. I think that's the person who's at most risk because 75% of sellers didn't make quota in 2023 or the beginning of 2024. So if you're not adding value, if you're not learning, if you're not doing the things like Ben, like you were saying, like learning how to be client-centric and have conversations about problems, then I think you're a risk. On the other hand, I agree, like ChatGPT or whatever it is, our partner on this, obviously Hive, has a fantastic way they use AI for enablement. But if you're using it for ideation and to save time, I think time is the only thing we really can't extend. But we can certainly slow it down by being faster at other things and becoming more efficient. So I agree with you. I'm in AI tools a bunch. And I would say the one that I love that you did was, well, if you're not recording your calls, everybody's used to it. And my gosh, an AI summary of what happened in that call and the ability to review that prior to your next call, saves you an hour on every single call you're going to have every single week. I mean, that's a massive impact. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, let's do this. I want to shift a little bit into, it's not really a shift, I guess, as much as kind of maybe a tangent to some extent. Let's move over to the idea of, okay, so we have AI, we have BDRs, you've identified the fact that most companies probably have 20% on sales and 80% on their own product or service. So therefore you get people who are really knowledgeable in product and service, but don't know how to sell. So we've talked about that. Tell me how you all are looking at the sales leadership challenges that are out in the market right now. Quite frankly, because I'd like sales leaders and salespeople to know they're not the only ones. So talk to me a little bit about what are those frustrations today?
Yeah. Well, look, candidly, it's a pretty tough market for a lot of B2B sellers, right? You referenced that over 70% of people didn't hit target in 2023. What are salespeople motivated by? They're typically motivated by hitting target, earning good money, getting promoted. None of that is happening when you're missing target. And so what that leads to is a lot of frustration, a lot of desperation sometimes, which comes across in people's messaging and comes across in their tone over the phone. And then it leads to, job hoppers. And you reference the people who kind of cycle through opportunities. They jump ship from, A company to B company, which candidly has left the bar for sales quite low, in my opinion. I've met some amazing salespeople, and there are some fantastic salespeople out there. But actually, I think as a general, the bar is low. If you look at 9 out of the 10 emails that you probably had already during this call, Ken, they are templated emails that have been sent to 1,000 other people, and no one's going to respond to that. So I think the leadership challenge here is actually how to motivate and work with teams to give them the skill development they need to be successful in this market. Gone are the days where you can just hit the phone 100 times a day on a list and book consultative meetings, because that doesn't happen right now. It's arguably the hardest time it's ever been to be a BDR. You need to be an expert copywriter, an expert creative thinker to send LinkedIn videos and voice notes. You need to be a cold call master. You need to be an amazing researcher to go and find the information in these prospects. It's a really tough job. And so keeping those individuals both engaged, motivated, developed, whilst also really happy at work is a real challenge. I think that really starts, in my experience, from building a relationship with your employees. So that's both personally and at work. It's sharing goals, running a personal development plan, both for yourself and for them, to create an environment of trust and that you really care about these individuals and their success and development, both at the company.
What's the coolest goal you've seen by an employee? Like the thing or the one that surprised you the most that somebody had?
We hired someone recently, and when we came into this first one-to-one, they said they want to earn $10 million by the time that they're 40. I said, hey, look, that sounds great, but why have you picked that number 10 million? And she broke down then what she was going to earn each year and the progression plan to be earning that, so that ultimately with that money, she could put away into a 401k and an index fund and could retire by the time she was 40. And I loved it. She'd planned it out. She hadn't picked out of thin air. It was a smart goal, and she was set on achieving it, and she knew what she needed to do it. And I thought that was amazing that she planned that out.
You didn't have anybody say, like, I want to own a castle?
I know I'm from the UK, and where our heritage is maybe a little bit older than it is over here, Ken, but no castles. I've had dream cars. I've had, paying back their parents for colleges. I think the most fun ones sometimes are the people who want to go and own their own business, and they're super entrepreneurial, and they know the skill development they need to make. But hey, I'll have to drop your LinkedIn message if I ever get a castle, because I've not had one of those yet.
Well, now maybe you will in the next one. Hey, I heard you on the podcast. I want to own a castle. So
yeah.
That's interesting. I think one of the things that you're pointing out here, we're talking about motivation and intrinsic versus extrinsic and goal setting and all this kind of stuff. One of the things you're really pointing out is this. I believe it's incumbent upon a leader to actually know what the goals are of the people that they manage, and then show them how the company can help them achieve those goals. And at some point, if the company can no longer help them get to those goals, it's cool if we part ways. But it's got to be their why is really what you're getting at. It's got to be their why as the reason to why they want to do things and they want to be successful. And too often we say, well, we hired you and we're putting a quarter in your back because we're going to pay you a commission for every sale. And we assume that's going to motivate people. Would you say that that's something you've seen as you deal with sales leaders all across the world at this point? How do you feel about it when I say that?
The really interesting word you used there, Ken, was your why. And I think a lot of salespeople either don't know that or they forget about it when times are tough, and they come into the office every morning thinking, if I don't close this deal, I'm going to be put on a performance plan, or if I don't book this meeting today, I'm not going to hit my commission. And they forget the real reason as to why they're coming to work and what they're doing. For every hire that we make at Pareto, we ask them to go and watch the Simon Sinek Start With Why TED Talk. One, to give them an idea of what Pareto's why is and to start thinking about that. But most importantly, to help them understand what their why is, because ultimately, a manager can help motivate you, they can help support you, but it's your own intrinsic why and your pursuit of that is going to help people be successful in sales right now.
So this question's coming since we're having the conversation about your why.
Yeah.
So tell me.
Let's do it.
Tell me your why.
Yeah, I think it changes as well as you progress. I come from a really small village with a castle in the United Kingdom with population of probably 400 people. There was 4 people in my school year when I went to primary school. The majority of my friendship group from my early career went to the closest universities around them. They still live in that same town. They live really happy lives. I've got nothing against that. However, that's not really what I wanted to achieve. And so I went to the furthest university I could in the UK, down in Brighton. I then moved to London. I asked Pareto what the opportunity and chances were of me moving to New York, because I wanted to go and not live in that tiny village. I wanted to go and live in arguably one of the best cities in the world. And sometimes I have to remind myself of that when I'm having a bad week. I'm super fortunate to get the ferry to work every morning. I can see the city, and sometimes the self-gratitude and thinking about, actually, wow, I'm getting the ferry to a job in FiDi in New York City. That's amazing. And so that at the moment is my why. It's the opportunity to have come from this little country boy who lived in his castle, not quite a castle, but the small country boy who's now working and living in New York is my why right now. But I do think you need to revisit it. Probably every new role that you get, or every new company you go to, or every new place you live, it's worth revisiting because it changes. I'm not sure if you shared your why on the podcast, Ken?
I haven't, but I'll share it with you. So my why is this. It's the people's lives that we change. So we've taken individual sales reps from $60,000 and being on a PIP plan with 0 sales to making $600,000 3 years later. And we've done it over and over again. And like, I'm already getting goosebumps telling the story. And it's not the money that gets me going and gets me up in the morning. It's in those cases, their families got to make some choices they couldn't make, right? They got to choose, does the spouse want to stay home or work less? They got to choose, did they want to move into a house that had a better school district for their children? They got to choose, do I want to have more experiences and vacations that are more memorable with my family? And so that's why we get up in the morning every morning. And now I've got goosebumps all over again, but it's because it's how we impact individuals' lives. It's the business owner who sold 51% of his business for $250 million, and it was life-changing generational wealth for his family. And it's just what we get out of that. It's like, what do they actually get and experience because of it? Money's not the number one thing. But I can tell you that being successful in what we do in sales, there's generally a monetary benefit. So we find most of the sellers, most of the companies we work with, 50% of them are intrinsically motivated. The check's just the thing after we enjoy what we do. But it's super cool to see people change their entire life for themselves and their families.
I think, well, candidly, that's a much better, or not better why than mine, but it's a more rounded external why than mine one probably is. But I also think the beauty of sharing your whys and speaking your whys is that it's telling a story, which arguably is the most important thing in a sales process, right? It's the ability to take a fact or take an item and tell it as a story that feels real to people. Because, hearing that, I'd be shocked if you didn't have a few people reach out to explore a little bit more about how that business owner sold 51% of his business, because that's far more credible than you sharing how you do it to individuals.
Yeah, but I think it's just the impact and the outcomes, right? We want to do the same thing for our prospects and our clients. Part of your why, like, we have to have a personal why. I know that if I become, as my father said, I'll back up. My dad's an engineer. Okay, so he and I don't see eye to eye on anything in the world of business, right? Because I'm an entrepreneur and my whole world is taking risks. My father, on the other hand, like, if you can't put it in a spreadsheet in a linear fashion, like, he's out. Like, too much risk. So my father said to me once, he said, Ken, become the expert in your craft and the money will follow. So as you lean into this, whether you're a seller, sales management, or leadership, right? Lean into becoming an expert in serving people, an expert in your craft. If you look at, like, I've got a book behind me called The Go-Giver. When I was in my mid-30s, it changed my relationship with money because I realized the more people I served, the more money I could make. So yeah, super cool. I love what you're saying. The why matters so much. And if anyone takes anything from this, go ask your team members.
Ask your team members and yourself. I think that, a leader's motivation starts with themselves and why they're a leader in the first place, and then go and find out your teams. I completely agree, Ken.
Yeah, I think it's super important because you get to know people in a way that most people aren't investing in. And I think in this post-2000 world, it's gotten really, really simple and really, really easy to just kind of get on a computer screen, not have a relationship with anybody, but act like we do.
It's a really tough topic, that, Ken, I think, because I feel quite sorry for the people in that environment. I've made some of my best friends working at Pareto over 6 years. I've been back for 2 weddings of individuals I met at Pareto. I lived with someone that I worked with at Pareto. I've probably got members of my groom party when I do choose to get married later in life that come from Pareto.
Well, that'll be because you're a good storyteller with a healthy why and a better communicator. So clearly you haven't mastered the art of communication yet if you haven't been able to talk somebody into it.
Yeah, that's my biggest development area that I discussed with my manager this weekend. But it's the virtual world and selling. I think that it's a double-edged sword, right? You're going to get good talent in being remote, and there's definitely a a hybrid factor to getting the most out of people and the way people learn. But the relationships and the support and the learning by osmosis that you get from an office environment is really hard to replicate virtually. And, right now, I don't think there is a one size fits all answer. And I think probably what works for one organization wouldn't work for another one.
Yeah, I would say that it's interesting because we've watched the relationship between employees and employers. This is the most radical change in the US since the union, but if you take it globally, it's probably the most radical change in employer-employee relationships the world's ever seen. And that's the remote versus, you see Amazon or a bunch of large companies trying to bring them back to the office, and everybody's like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm out. Like, I'll go do something else. So I want to make sure we get into this because one of the areas that we know that's very, very difficult, and I want to hit it on two fronts, is hiring salespeople. Now, it's difficult on two fronts. It's difficult from being an owner, a sales manager, a sales leader, because let's be honest, most of them aren't trained on how to do it. And then it's also, hey, if I'm a seller, what am I doing wrong, or how do I stand out in a process so that I can actually get people who want to talk to me? So I don't care which way we go with this first, but I would love to talk about it from the hiring and then being hired perspective.
Yeah. Let's start with the hiring. And one of my favorite sales books, The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon, speaks about a fundamental of a successful sales organization is hiring A players. Like, you cannot compromise on hiring A player talent. The challenge, right, and you referenced this earlier, is that there's a lot of candidates out there who have jumped from job to job. They probably interview very well because they know how to use Salesforce or they've worked with Medic before. And often those individuals overpromise, they underdeliver, they come with their black book of contacts, but they're not motivated to really be a hunter, which you need in this environment. And that's actually what our two founders at Pareto were finding as sales directors in the telecoms industry. And what they did was they shifted their focus from hiring on experience to hiring on competence. And actually, what makes a good salesperson from an intrinsic basis rather than their track record. And they hired a couple of fresh graduates. They were really dynamic, really hungry, really good communicators.
One of them's name was Ben Booth, just so we're all sure. One of them was named Ben Booth, but go ahead, I'm just teasing.
One of them, I mean, I embody the person that they hired 100%. But they hired two pretty inexperienced salespeople. They gave them good soft skill sales training, and they were blown away by how amazing these people performed, and they thought they stumbled upon something pretty exciting. So they founded Pareto Law. And what we look at is 80% of what makes a salesperson great is their intrinsic or their innate characteristics, right? It's how curious they are, how confident they are, how dynamic they are, and 20% of it is trainable skill. And so what we advise organizations to do and what we help organizations to do is to look for those competencies, because you can train someone on cybersecurity, right? You can train someone on how to sell a marketing platform. What you can't train someone to do is pick the phone up at 8:45 in the morning to call through their best leads as they're going into the office. And so that is one of the challenges that I think companies face. And you're right, people don't get enough training on, is how to identify sales competence rather than just sales experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. People will ask me about my experiences in sales, and I'll say, well, I've been in like 8 industries. So I'm a complete mutt, therefore completely unhireable today by anybody else. Because all they want is, hey, do you have experience in SaaS or tech or this industry or that? We also believe what you're saying too, because we actually analyze people on the 21 core selling competencies, and you have to look for it. So I don't know, do you have some tips maybe? So if I'm interviewing somebody, what's 1 or 2 things I might ask or 1 or 2 angles I might take, which would help me identify, hey, does this person have some of those innate abilities?
I think it starts pre-interview by looking at what competencies you believe make successful salespeople in your organization. So that's probably the first exercise.
So what are some of those competencies? Give me a couple.
Yeah, I think the first 3 that come to mind are coachability, curiosity, and resilience. Coachability, I said curiosity first, because if you're not innately curious, both with your prospects and internally, your development, your ramp will both be slower and you'll find it challenging. And so the way that you can test someone's curiosity is on the preparation they've done before the interview. It's on giving them a little bit of information and seeing if they ask questions around it. And it's on the questions that they ask at the end of the interview. All will give you a good indication of a candidate's curiosity. Their coachability, I would test with a role play, whether that's a BDR that you do a cold call role play with, or an AE that you're doing some discovery role play with. Get them to do it once, give them some feedback, ask them to do it again, and see how well they take that feedback, as well as asking situational questions on where they've got something wrong previously and how they change their behaviors or change something to better that. I think someone's resilience is really hard to assess for, because everyone will say, I'm resilient. I don't mind making 80 cold calls. I played in a sports team. We lost a few games. It was horrible. But actually in practice, it's really challenging. And I think then that's where the why comes into play, because people will be resilient to achieving their why, or people will be resilient in the pursuit of their why. And so finding out what that is and testing their resilience against that is arguably the best thing to test that resilience. What have you seen, Ken, as to your most important characteristic when hiring or working with salespeople?
Commitment is by far the number one thing that we test for. And that is, are you going to do the things, or are you always going to have a caveat on the thing, right? If it's a BDR position and you must be making phone calls by 8 and you must make 122 a day, will you just do it because that's what it takes to be successful? Or will you say, well, I'll do it as long as I can drop my kids off at 9 and then I can come back and then I can pick my kids up at 3 and then I get to clock out by 5. So commitment's definitely one of the things that we're really, really looking for. The other stuff you said is perfect. And I believe there's a way that when I've interviewed has been successful, and that is this. I'm looking for people who can be a student and a teacher in the exact same conversation. Because then it shows me innate curiosity and then their ability to actually shine when they need to, as appropriate as an expert. And then the second thing from a hiring process that I always try to do is, I don't want to match industries, but I want to match sales cycle types. So if you have door-to-door sales, I don't care what industry they were in, were they used to going door-to-door, right? Whether it's homes or businesses or whatever, if you've got a long tail sales cycle, well, then you better have somebody who understands and is okay with that. Whereas if you've got a short sales cycle where you expect stuff to turn every 30 days, don't hire somebody who is doing strategic enterprise stuff, because that's not their world. So I think those are a couple of things that we've done when we look at hiring, and heck, did them when I was, running sales teams specifically. So talk to me about this. I want to make sure that we hit this one thing kind of on the way out. Gosh, sales resumes and the way people perform in these interviews just is atrocious. And that might be too hard, and I might have just lost every follower I have on LinkedIn saying that. But what can we, in 2 or 3 things, what can we tell sellers? Hey, here's the mistakes that we see most often, whether it's the resume or how they interview or whatever. And this will help you actually come to the cream of the crop and be able to get into places that you want to for interviews and ultimately get hired.
Ken, if you'd have seen my resume when I left college, I don't think I'd have even got a conversation with you. It had definitely been thrown in the trash, right? And I think that it's a really interesting topic, because arguably a resume for a sales interview is pretty worthless. Everyone says they're confident. Everyone says they're a great communicator. Everyone's been on every president's club they've ever had access to. And it's really difficult to stand out. I think one of my top bits of advice for anyone interviewing for a sales role is to do all the things that require no skill really well. Things that, connecting with the people that are going to be interviewing with you on LinkedIn before the interview, so at least your name pops up in front of them. It's asking for next steps and, testing their commitment to you as a candidate at the end of the interview by asking about reservations and how they think it went. It's sending a good detailed follow-up that isn't just, thanks for your time, I'm really excited by this. It's, hey, Ken, I really enjoyed learning about X and Y at your company. I think I'm a great fit based on these positions. And it's the wraparound to the interview that puts candidates to the next step. It's not just applying for a job on LinkedIn and hoping to hear back. It's applying for the job, reaching out to the hiring manager, reaching out to a few people who are in that position currently to get the inside scoop on how it's looking. All the things that wrap around the interview actually make people really successful in interviews, and not enough candidates do it at the moment.
Yeah, if you're a BDR or SDR, treat the process like outbound prospecting.
If you're a salesperson as well, an interview is essentially a sales process for you. And if the way that you run that sales process of an interview is an insight into how you're going to run the sales process when you're hired at that company. And so we definitely look for it and share internally before we're interviewing someone at Pareto. Oh, hey, so-and-so's just viewed my LinkedIn profile. They've just sent me a LinkedIn message asking for this information. It's all really good data for those individuals to use. So I think that's the number one thing that I'd suggest candidates do. I think the number two thing is storytelling. We've spoken about it quite a lot on this call today. There's probably a lot of BDR candidates who are going to listen to this podcast who are worried at not having a lot of experience. One really easy thing you can do ahead of an interview is look at the job requirements and competencies that they look for on their job ad, on their LinkedIn page, and write down a story of where you've shown that competence or activity in a different field for each one of those things, so that you go armed into that interview with some good stories, be that from working in a bar, be that from sports, be that from raising money from charity. But if you can articulate that story, you'll build more credibility and trust with the person who's interviewing you.
Yeah, my daughter recently graduated from college and was applying for a job at one of the bigger companies in the world. And it's not sales, but she was going to manage people. And what's interesting is if you're a seller, a sales manager, somebody, and you're going to go through an interview, understand like this simple fact. What they're trying to figure out is, can you reproduce results that you claim to have produced? And do you have proof that you did that? And so with her as an example, she said, well, hey, they gave me the questions ahead of time. And one of them was, how do I resolve conflict? And I said, well, tell me about some conflicts you had when you were managing people. And she said, well, this, and this. But it was like this convoluted story. And I said, well, okay, let's talk about what that process looked like. So you did this first? Yeah. I did this first? Yeah. I did this next? Yeah. So that's how you manage conflict, and that's your process. So one of the things I can tell you, because we interview sales leaders, managers, and people all the time, be able to defend what you claim and be able to show me that you have a process that you understand so you can do it again. And I think you do those things, you end up putting yourself at the head of the class and have a pretty good chance of getting that job that you want.
Yeah. And those processes and scalable, repeatable behaviors can come from anything, right? Patrick Mahomes will do the same process before every single game. But equally, Cristiano Ronaldo will follow the same process for every free kick that he takes. And if you could demonstrate that you do that in some form of your life, be that in sports, be 100%. That in another job, and you can articulate that, it's a great tip for anyone interviewing for any level of sales position or leadership position.
That's awesome. Well, Ben, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast. This has been fantastic. And I think everybody's going to get an absolute boatload of value out of it. So my last question for you then is this. If somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe they listen to this podcast and you inspired a young seller who wants some help. Maybe it's a sales manager or a CEO of a company that Pareto might be able to help. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, if you are a frustrated commercial leader looking at your sales team, be that hiring or your existing team, or if you're a sales candidate that's wanting to break into a new opportunity, or you just like funny sales memes, you can go and follow me on LinkedIn, Ben Booth at Pareto. I share somewhat interesting stories about my experiences as a sales leader, about tips and tricks for salespeople at all level, and the occasional meme that does include the Chiefs, Ken. So you might want to unfollow me.
We'll have all of Ben's contact information below in the show notes. So please, worst case scenario, reach out and tell him you heard him here on this podcast so he'll know where it came from. And we're looking forward to seeing our next guest on the next episode. And we hope that you'll join us for it. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.